Welcome to this very special edition of Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Leroy Slanzi. He is an experienced educator, 25-year career in education. He is an author, penned the influential book Emotional Schools, and is also a facilitator of professional development sessions. Is also a much sought after keynote speaker. Welcome to the show, Leroy.
Well, thanks for having me, Ajay. Appreciate you having me, my friend.
You are welcome. Welcome to the show, Leroy. You are welcome to India in this online form. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to talk right now. We'll be talking about how to revolutionize education through emotional intelligence. But before we come to that, we will talk. Let's understand a bit about your career, about your journey, so that people exactly know from you who they are listening to.
Well, I'm from Canada. So hello, everybody out there in India and wherever else you're from. I'm from a small town and I made my way to a bigger city, and I started working in education about 25 years ago. And, I've watched over the last 25 years how education has shifted to a place where kids are much more emotional and struggle with their mental health than they ever have before. I feel like 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, kids were a little stronger. They were able to persevere more, and definitely the influence of technology and social media is wreaking some havoc on our kids. And not to mention our parents are also struggling with their emotional well-being and their mental health as well. So it's just it's a perfect storm, basically. And so that's why I wrote the book, and that's where I'm at in my educational journey, is meandering through the changes, and I've got a good idea of what needs to happen next for things to go well for our parents and for our kids and society as a whole, to be honest with you.
Absolutely, Leroy. So to understand the situation in that, how is the situation? Do you have any numbers, anything that you can share with in the so that they can understand this is the present state of the students or teachers, the system, because this sort of a impact is also there in other parts of the world, including India, because social media is everywhere. The
Mm-hmm.
new age is everywhere, so we cannot run. But US and that part of the world perhaps seem to be much more aligned, or much more tuned with all the positive things as well as negative things also. I want to understand a bit more the way you understand it.
Yeah, so I have conversations with people all over the world, to be honest. And like you said, AJ, it's not a Canada issue, it's not an American issue, it's a global issue. And I was having a conversation with a teacher earlier today, and she told me that at her school their staff there's a 75% changeover. That means 75% of the teachers are leaving to go to a different school or leaving the profession altogether. And it's for a combination of reasons. It's because of student behavior, or it's because of leadership. And that all ties into that emotional intelligence piece, right? And you can have a conversation with almost anyone around the world, and if you don't have the ability to control your emotions or manage your emotions, you're going to probably say or do the wrong thing. And of course, when you say or do the wrong thing, it just increases those stressors in your body, which then makes your life difficult, students more difficult. And when you take that inability to manage your emotions as an adult, and then you take that inability to manage your emotions as a kid and you combine it, it just creates this place where teachers are burning out. Kids aren't as successful in schools. There's a decline. Every school, I think, in the world is struggling with filling teaching jobs right now. I know in Canada, the United States, and in Australia, and New Zealand, and in United Kingdom, there's a teacher shortage, and there's a shortage because of the climate and the culture that we're seeing in our buildings.
Right, Leroy. So you said teachers are moving to different schools because of behavior, also one of the reasons. So where are they going? I assume that they are leaving public schools and going to private schools. Is the atmosphere better for them there?
No, not necessarily. I think what's happening is, we're in a place now where if a teacher wants to continue teaching and they're not ready to leave the profession, you know, you find out where there's a good school leader. It doesn't have to be a private school, could be a public school. As a teacher, and I did it myself last year. The leadership in the school district I was at was difficult to work with, and because of that, I looked elsewhere, and I actually moved to an Indigenous school here in Canada, and the leadership is much better, and because of that, I'm in a better place. So you just hear, as a teacher, you're basically a free agent, and you can shop around, and if a school principal or the district superintendent or whoever's managing education isn't doing what they're supposed to do to make sure that their parents and their teachers and their kids are all in a line, we can leave. We can go and work wherever we want to. If I wanted to right now, if my boss decided to not be supportive and was, his leadership skills were suspect, I'd have 10 opportunities lined up to go work in different schools. Public, private, independent, it wouldn't matter, right? And I think that's the key to this emotional revolution piece, is that, as a leader, if you want to maintain having your staff come back year after year, and you want your staff to come back and want to work for you and feel respected, and you want to nurture their professional growth, you have to be an emotional leader. You have to understand relationships. You have to understand organization. You have to understand servant leadership as well. And if you come in as an authority, basically you're an authoritarian, it's my way or the highway, that doesn't work in education. It's you're not in big business. You're working with people who care about kids. And in order to get teachers to be successful in their classrooms and inherently have kids successful, they've got to feel good in their jobs. That doesn't mean you can't be a boss and have them do what they're supposed to do, but it means that you have to nurture those relationships, and you have to nurture your organization so that they stay.
Right, Leroy. So who are these leaders? I thought in school the leaders are the principals, or
Yeah.
is it something, or is it much more of bureaucracy that has crept into the education system elsewhere, or is it the market that has crept into the education system much more strongly, or is it again the politicians behind that market who has crept into the education system?
Yeah,
Help me
AJ,
understand this.
AJ, it sounds like you might have read my book. So it's all of the above. If I gave you a multiple choice test right now, it's all of the above. It's how the Ministry of Education in whatever province, state, country you're in decides to lay the rules out, right? Starting with curriculum, testing, hiring practices. And a lot of times those people who are in those levels have never even been in a classroom or in a school, right? And then it trickles down and you get into school boards and school districts, and you have superintendents, assistant superintendents, directors of instruction who once were great principals or maybe a good teacher, but they haven't been in the trenches in 15 years. And so they're out of touch of what's going on, and then you get into schools, and sometimes you run into situations where you have leaders who got the job based on the fact that they have the credentials and they look good on paper, but they might not have the proper leadership skills. Maybe they're managers, and maybe they're not that good at leading. And so you have to have a combination of both. And that's what, I really dive into with my book. And I also do some leadership coaching and teacher coaching and parent coaching, because there's ways to survive this, the way it's working in our school system right now. It's not easy, but it's all of it. And then it trickles down right into homes where parents aren't parenting as well as they used to because they're also on technology, or there's this situation where both parents have to work because they don't, one parent can't stay home because there's just not enough money coming in. So kids then go home to an empty house and their babysitter's a cell phone, which means they're learning things that they shouldn't be on there. And because they're on their cell phones, that are not out, they're not out playing and developing those, those skills around collaboration and communication and conflict resolution that they would if they were playing with their friends. So it's a real myriad of all of it. And that's, one of the things with my book is I talk about all of those things, and I talk about how emotions come into play, and I talk about, the neurology of emotions as well, because our body reacts to our emotions, which then causes us to change our behavior. And so I identify all those things in my book, and then I lay it out. I lay out a nice plan for teachers, for schools, for school districts to follow in terms of getting their schools on track, right? So it's pretty important stuff.
Absolutely. We will come to the Emotional Schools book. Just after this question, one thing I want to understand is that teachers may have to go according to law or whatever rules that they are set, because they have to do a job. Principals may
Yeah.
have to. But what about parents? Parents are independent of all these things. They are outside. They know the problem. There are millions of them across the country, one country, another country, all over the world. Why do they feel helpless to other private school or public school? Why do they feel so helpless against the might of such establishments or lack of leadership? Why
Yeah.
don't they? Because every time they go and vote the same people, from local authorities to the higher ups, why can't they influence the education system rather than it being other way around?
Yeah, I think they can and they can't. So, with most ministries of education, there's a school act, which would be like the Bible of how the schools are supposed to run. And then most schools have a code of conduct, which kids have to follow. And so the difficulty for parents is they can't bring their own personal agenda into a school. Otherwise, you're going to have, a million different things wanting to be taught, and behaviors have to be, based on different family values and whatnot. And so what parents have to do is they have to adhere to what's going on in the school based on their code of conduct and their philosophy and whatnot, right? But that does not mean parents don't have a voice. Parents do have a voice. And I think that's the part that's difficult is that that's not communicated well enough to parents, because there's parent advisory councils that they could be part of. They have access to emailing and calling principals, superintendents, and whatnot. And I tell parents all the time, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. If you come in enough, and if you have enough conversations, and if what your concerns are valid and they don't impact the rest of the school, in a negative way, you'll be listened to and you'll be heard, right? It just depends on, how crazy a parent might come in with their ideals and their thoughts, or how amazing their ideas are. And I have had parents absolutely influence some of the things that happens in the schools I've been in, because I've worked with some very intelligent or very thoughtful or empathetic parents, right? So it's about communicating. The problem is if parents don't communicate the right way, they're going to get a door shut in their face, right? And and that's the unfortunate part. And I think that's part of the reason why I have a parent coaching business as well, because I want parents to learn the tricks of the trade and have the strategies to work with schools and to work with teachers or school districts, so they can meander through that. Because a lot of times parents desperately need our help, because when their kids are having behavior problems at school, guess what? They're having them at home, whether it be sleep deprivation, or if they're having eating disorders, if they have mental health issues, if they have poor study habits, if they're having temper tantrums. Parents aren't, oftentimes equipped or have the knowledge to deal with that, because they're learning on the fly, and educators do. And so that's the important piece, is having that line of communication open. And again, that comes back to leadership. Right. And so the leadership of the school needs to open that door. Same with school districts. Those lines of communication have to be open so parents can have a voice, as long as it's not nuts, because there's a lot of crazy parents out there who just, it's too much. But there's a lot of amazing parents on the flip side too, right? So
Absolutely. So now let's come to the solution part. Let's come to your book, Emotional Schools. Uh, it's a nice name, but I would want to understand why did you title it that way? Secondly, who is this book for? Is it for students? Is it for parents, teachers, or the authorities, or the powerful people behind them?
It's for all of the above, with the exception of the students. If you're a student who's 16, 15, 16, 17 years old, there's a few chapters in there that revolve around emotions and the science of emotions. And I think everyone needs to learn how to label their emotions and understand their emotions so they can self-soothe and cope with their emotions so they don't make poor decisions, right? But the book itself, it's there for parents so they can meander through the system. I lay it out for them so they know what it looks like on the inside. They're basically getting the manual of what it looks like behind the curtain. When there's a performance, you go see an opera or you see a theater performance, you always wonder what's going on behind the scenes with the actors and the directors. Well, this book, it opens that curtain so parents can have a look. And on top of it, what it does for teachers is it gives them a guide as to how they can change their classrooms so their classrooms aren't so emotional. Because when their classrooms are emotional, the behavior escalates. And then it's basically, for teachers, it's all day they're just putting out fires. So I go into dealing with the why kids are emotional, what's changed in society, what we need to teach around emotions. I teach the science behind talking about the polyvagal nerve and all of that stuff. And then I get into the leadership piece around that. So I teach teachers how they can become leaders in their school, even though there's a principal there. And then I lay it out for the principals about the 4 or 5 types of leadership that they should have in there. And I talk about building a collective capacity. So it's not just one person running the show, it's a team running the show. Because if you don't in a school have a team running the show, you're going to be in trouble, because one kid is going to interact with 10 adults in one day. And every adult needs to be on the same page when they're dealing with that kid, just like every adult needs to be on the same page when they're dealing with parents. And I lay that out for not only for principals, and I talk about leadership and teachers, I lay it out for school districts as well, because they're very much about policy, and policies, it's good. The intent of policy is there to make sure kids can learn. But if it's not backed by proper leadership and proper communication, and even having their own emotions in check, you're in trouble, right? And so that's what this book is it talks about how emotional not only schools are, but how emotional it is in the public education system or the private education system, because emotions affect you, they affect me, they affect the guy next door. Whether you get a flat tire, you lose your keys, your wife divorces you, you run short on money, all of those things are emotional and they cause stress for us. And when we're stressed, we oftentimes make poor decisions. And that's what's happening in our schools, is because they're so emotionally charged, and because the mental health issues in our schools are increasing. This book was a necessity. And I don't even want to get into really what's going on in the United States with the amount of violence they're seeing with school shootings and whatnot. Each one of those incidents, I can guarantee you that those shooters have massive mental health issues, or there's some sort of disconnect between their family and themselves, or them and the school. And these are kids that are lost, or maybe they have a mental health issue that's never been diagnosed because of the communication between home and school and district. And and a lot of it comes down to how kids are raised and if parents are involved or not. But we're living in a world in our system where we have very emotional kids, and our schools are emotional place. So that's why it's titled Emotional Schools. And the looming mental health crisis it's there. I've seen over the last 5 years, we see 5 to 6% increase in mood disorders. Anxiety disorders are increasing by 10%. It's becoming harder and harder. However, that's the other part of the book. It's a guide to make it better for teachers and principals and school districts to structure and organize their school in a way that they can combat that, as well as the teaching component, so they can deal with the core issue, which is emotional dysregulation.
Right, Leroy. So I want to understand, how much is the system aware of this, and aware in the sense that they are actually trying to tackle the issue, trying to find solutions, rather than forget about it and only playing or pandering to the market. I want to understand that. Uh, is it going towards the better, or do you see it going towards the worse?
Well, I
until
think,
they read your book.
yeah, I think the more guys and women and men out there, leaders like me, or even teachers like me that are out there that talk about it and get on podcasts with people like you, and we share, and parents too. Parents know, parents are feeling it in their own homes, and I think it's becoming more and more evident that we're living in a world where the social emotional well-being of our kids and our communities is struggling. All you have to do is walk down the street and you can see it. You can see emotional outbursts or just how people are communicating. And I think it's becoming known. And I hope, being on, this podcast, that people reach out and they, because I do go and do workshops for teachers and schools, and I try to work with administrators and teachers and parents as well. And the goal is to get in front of people and to talk about the issues and dive into them, but not just dive into them and, like I'm providing theory, but to give them practical strategies so they can go and make a difference, so they can go home and sleep at night,
Absolutely, absolutely, Leroy. So one solution, let me try and understand from you. You talk about the concept of creating a pathway through the mental health crisis. Elaborate this that a bit for the audience.
Sure. So let's go all the way back to kindergarten. Kids who are 4 or 5 years old, and I don't know if you have kids, AJ, but you've watched kids have temper tantrums. They don't get something they don't want. They want something. Their parents don't give it to them. They lay on the floor. They scream and they kick, and parents either give in or they don't give in. And so what's happening is that's happening more and more and more. And because kids are so dysregulated, it creates a bit of chaos unlike we've ever seen. And so starting in kindergarten, when these kids are 5 years old, because they're not playing as much with their peers, and because they're behind a screen, and because they're not out there naturally learning how to communicate and collaborate and deal with conflict with their friends, they get to school and it's a mess. And so we used to have, back in the day, one or two kids who are dysregulated. Now you walk into a class, in a kindergarten class, and half the class is dysregulated. And so that's why it's important to teach that social emotional piece early and often, because if you don't, those kids' behavior is just going to manifest and grow and grow and grow. And that's what we're seeing in schools, from kindergarten to grade 1 to grade 2, all the way to grade 12. A lot of times by the time you get into high school, kids are dropping out, or they get moved down a path of drugs and alcohol because that's how they cope. And so the sooner you introduce this emotional intervention in kindergarten, and you continue to do it all the way through. I mean, look how much money people are making with adults around mindfulness and meditation and all of those things. Myself, I have to take deep breaths. I have to check my emotional well-being. And I'm pretty much an expert. I've researched it. I've wrote a book on it. But every day I have moments where I'm like, ooh, I better take a deep breath here, or I'm about to say something that somebody's not going to like, right? And AJ, right? And it's the same thing as when you get excited and you're overly happy, and even when you're happy, you might say or do something you shouldn't, right? And so the key is to try to help society get back to a place where kids can cope with the smallest of stressors, because right now the tiniest things are causing temper tantrums or poor behavior or disrespectful behavior. And that's an issue. And I don't know if you see it in India as much as we see it here, but disrespectful behavior is on the rise as well, right? Where kids have, because back in our day, remember, it was fear-based. If you messed with the old man, you were getting one on the rear end, right? And, nowadays that doesn't exist. Kids have no fear. So when you're working with kids, you don't have fear to lean on like you did 20 years ago, right? And because fear is removed, now you got to find other ways to get kids to understand and develop those skills, so they're respectful, they have manners, they can persevere, they're motivated, and so we've got to teach those things that used to come from the home. When mom was at home, mom did all the work. Mom created the manners and the good behavior and the respect, but mom has to work, right? AJ, mom has to work now, or the bills don't get paid. And so schools, unfortunately, we have to take that on. And as much as, you hear teachers and schools, they complain, oh, if the parents would just do this, if the parents would just do that, and I agree, to some extent, parents should put their phones down and spend more time with their kids. But when parents are both working and they're not home because society has got, the inflation is through the roof and you can't afford, your rent or the food prices are unreal. I mean, it's a combination of everything. And so that's where my book and the pathway through it comes into place. It's a team effort. It's a team effort between the community. It's a team effort between the school community and government, right? And so that's my goal, is to kind of bring it all together. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely, absolutely. There is much to learn from you. For a lot of people, much to learn from you, and about all these things, much to learn. A lot of people who want to learn more from you, about you, connect with you, get your coaching, get your book. So what is the best way for them to do so, Leroy?
Absolutely. My book is actually for sale on Amazon in India. So you can go on the Amazon in India and you can order my book. And I strongly suggest you order the book. It's $25 Canadian. I don't know how much that is in India, but you know what? It's a couple cups of coffee. Buy the book. I also suggest you go to my website, www.leroyslanzi.com. It's really simple, my first and last name. And you can see on there, I've got a tab for coaching, for professional development and workshops. And I'll get on the phone, and I don't care if a parent needs to talk at 5 a.m. because they're on the other side of the world. I'll get up at 5 a.m. and chit chat. I do struggle with late night stuff because I go to bed early, but otherwise, you know what? I'm on YouTube and places like that, but reach out to me, send me an email. I have I don't charge for an email if somebody wants to have a quick conversation, because, as much as I do want to make money selling my book and whatnot, I also want to change the world. And I've done this for 25 years, and I got a lot of information, and I got a lot of strategies for parents, teachers, and leaders in schools, and even in India, and so, what, look me up, and I want to help.
Absolutely. Absolutely. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, AJ. You have yourself a good night, my friend.
You too.